Welcome back to another HBAR DeFi Corner where we cover everything that's happening in the Hideera DeFi ecosystem. So we have Brady here. He is the CEO and co-founder of Bonzo Finance Labs. But before we get into all the news and everything that's going on in this space, I do want to say that nothing in here is financial advice. We're going to be getting into tokens. We're going to be getting into yields, all that kind of stuff. Make sure that you understand all the risks involved before getting involved with DeFi and also understand your local laws and regulations. But with all that, Brady, out of the way, welcome back.
Thanks so much. Excited to be here.
Yeah, so why don't we start off today just diving into some of the news and things that are going on within the Hideera DeFi space?
Yeah, so to kick things off, we have some news about Hideera and in particular HBAR. So HBAR was listed last week on Robinhood for US customers. And I know Robinhood was one of the sort of last tier one exchanges that HBAR had not been listed on. 2 weeks before that, it was Kraken, and they had been kind of holding out, I think, for a long time. So, great to kind of like see those gaps close. It definitely had market impact too. We saw after that listing, there was a bit of a spike that settled down, but it definitely seemed like there was interest and obviously like pent up demand for people who were using Robinhood that saw HBAR get listed. So that was really great. And then in addition to that, there's been a lot more news on the regulation front, at least from like the US government perspective and the SEC. There's a presentation by Paul Adkins, who's the SEC chair, around Project Crypto. It seems like in general, at a high level, it's a new era for regulation with regards to crypto assets. It kind of started out with the Genius Act, and then we're seeing other bills be passed through that are related to like digital asset regulation in the US, and really opens up the door to be able to have mainstream adoption. And I know that's something, especially for Hideera, with its large focus on mainstream adoption, enterprise use cases, things of that nature, it's probably really going to go a long way if those get through.
Well, you touched on a lot of different things there. First of all, starting with the listings, Robinhood is unlike a lot of other platforms because not only do they allow crypto trading like we see on all the other centralized exchanges, but they have securities trading, stocks and things along those lines. I think that's a really good listing for HBAR, especially when the ETF comes out, because it's possible that, of course, the ETFs themselves as securities will be available on there, but it's also going to have that spot trading. So it exposes HBAR to a whole new set of people that might not be crypto native. So I'm certainly excited about that one.
No doubt. Yeah. And Robinhood's really becoming such a powerhouse too, in terms of like the offerings that they have. They even have, I went in the app recently, prediction markets now are on Robinhood. I think their partner is like Kalshi that's doing that, but they've got the AI stuff with, I think it's Cortex that they have. And then, 401ks, everything. It's becoming like an everything financial app for sure.
Yeah, all that infrastructure for getting exposure to HBAR is coming out. And the last, of course, shoe to drop is going to be those ETFs. We have both of them in the pipeline for Canary Capital, and then we have one for Grayscale. And I think the deadline, at least for the Canary one, is November 11th. So we have a lot of stuff to look forward to over the next several months. I think that, like you're saying, the momentum that we're seeing in the Hideera ecosystem, all the fundamentals, which is all the things that are being built on Hideera, and then all of this other infrastructure that's being built on top is certainly pointing in the right direction. We've seen a big shift over the past several months as far as what the legacy HBAR Foundation was doing compared to what I see that's happening in the Hideera Foundation. Even things like the way they set up their blog, it's much more entertaining to read their blogs now. So it seems like they've brought in the right people. But going back to the developments in the government, what a difference a year makes. I mean, compared to where we were, where there was active like pushback coming from the government, to now it's really being fostered by this new administration and the SEC coming out with Project Crypto. Brady, I haven't heard anything that bullish come out of the industry, let alone something like the SEC. They are setting things up to really build the financial rails of all of the financial system on top of crypto, putting all that stuff in place. I think they've recognized now that this is the future. They don't want to stand in front of that innovation. They see the potential, they see the efficiency gains and everything else. And it was fun to watch Paul Atkins, as you mentioned, the SEC chairman, walk through past technological developments and things like the ticker tape and the DTCC and the precursor for the stock exchange itself, all of those innovations. And he's saying that this is the next innovation. But the other thing that struck me about that, and I talked about this in my show, is that the big news over the past couple years was Bitcoin. We had those ETFs come out first, and people, of course, are seeing that as a store of value. But what Paul Atkins is talking about here is the future of the financial rails. And that's not going to be on Bitcoin, which, even though it serves really well as a store of value, you really can't build the financial rails on top of it like you can some of these other platforms like Hideera. I think Hideera is probably best suited. And the proof of concept for all this stuff, of course, is DeFi. When it comes to what you saw come out of that speech and the developments we're seeing with the Genius Act, the Clarity Act, how do you think that's going to impact the DeFi system in the Hideera space and elsewhere?
Yeah, so I think, in thinking about the position that Hideera is in, the opportunity that it has, the trajectory of the market in general, and sort of where the low-hanging fruit is with regards to, like you said, some of these technologies that are being available that are going to be able to be, having mainstream adoption. The next focus area that I go towards is RWAs. And I know Hideera has made a very strong emphasis in its messaging and integrations and these other things around real-world assets. We have ArcX Crypto that is tokenizing RWAs for BlackRock, Aberdeen, a number of different funds. We have tokenized carbon credit RWAs that are coming out of Dovu and some of these other carbon credit platforms that are utilizing the Guardian on Hideera. And then I have noticed RWA XYZ now has a beta listing for Hideera Hashgraph, which is amazing. And then there was a message actually from the CEO of ArcX on X that he confirmed the tokenization of these assets on Hideera and then having them available in RWA XYZ. So it feels like all the pieces are coming together and it's really culminating into something that's going to be pretty powerful over the next, I'd say, probably a few months. So RWAs seem like the next lowest hanging fruit from the Hideera side, but I could see so many other opportunities too with regards to Hideera and these acts passing, even from a operational perspective with regards to Hideera governing council members that are operating nodes in the Hideera network and those nodes earning HBAR from transaction fees and how they maybe manage or hold or even able to hold crypto assets as part of that. And so this really opens up the door to, not just developments on the network itself in terms of tokenized assets and DeFi, but also the ability for these governing council members to be able to participate even further with the network and the variety of tasks that they do.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's just bringing clarity across the board. And just another update on RWA XYZ. I did talk to the Hideera Foundation, and they mentioned that all they're working on now is an efficient way to allow these teams that are minting RWA assets on Hideera to get that information to the platform, RWA XYZ. Of course, we're already starting to see some of that stuff with DeFi Llama, but as soon as they get all that figured out, that beta version is going to start to go live. And we have all kinds of stuff. Like you mentioned, we have carbon credits, we have funds, we have diamonds, we have gold, we have a lot of stuff that's minted on Hideera, and that's only going to increase over time. So let's dig into the specifics around the Hideera DeFi space. What's going on with Bonzo, Brady?
Yeah, so quick update on Bonzo. From the last time that we talked, USDC liquidity has obviously been just an incredibly important staple for the Bonzo protocol, really for any lending protocol. When you look at what they sort of live and die by, it's stablecoin liquidity. That's gone up past $10 million supplied, which is great. And then it's sitting at about 52% utilization. So folks, across the ecosystem are borrowing USDC native on HBAR, which is great. And then just seeing those numbers go up has been really wonderful to see. In addition to the increase in USDC liquidity, from a risk perspective, one of the additional changes that have been updated for the protocol is the addition of supply caps for various assets. And as the protocol grows, it's hit about $70 million in TVL. I think with the price drop recently, it's around 62 or 63 now. But additional precautions and critical thinking through risk that's involved with the protocol is really important. So supply caps effectively prevent the additional supply of some of the lower liquidity assets in the ecosystem that are supported by the protocol. And all of that information is available in the Bonzo Finance documentation. And a full message in Discord is available as well.
All right, sounds good. Now let's talk about the other major player we have in the space, SaucerSwap. What do you have on them?
Yeah, so for SaucerSwap, the biggest news recently was that they hit around $4 billion in total trading volume.
Impressive.
They've been just a staple in the Hideera ecosystem. They've brought so much community emphasis since they've launched all the way to today. Lots of developments in the pipeline for them around an update to the branding, limit orders that they have going, an application, a mobile application for being able to utilize SaucerSwap, similar to how Uniswap has their mobile app. So big kudos to SaucerSwap. Awesome milestone to be able to hit $4 billion in trading volume. And, when we start talking about the metrics, looking at trading volume, we are sort of on an upswing. So that's great to see as well.
And the next biggest DEX as far as volume and TVL is HSuite. They had some news come out as well.
Yeah, that's right. It looks like they're doing a round of Treasury Committee recruiting. So, I remember a while back they had done this originally, and it looks like they have a committee of folks, almost like a council, that looks to have like a multi-sig structure for managing Treasury.
That's right.
And so they're doing a recruiting thing for that. So, if you have the time, you're an HSuite community member and involved in that, definitely go check that out.
I know there is compensation involved with that, so they are looking for people that have been, as you mentioned, involved in the community, people that have been around for the past 2 years in their Discord and so forth. But if that fits you and you are passionate about that platform, it's certainly something you should volunteer for and see if you can get involved with. Because, like I said, there is some compensation involved. And what's going on as far as USDC? We've seen a lot of movements. I know we're going to talk about it once we get to our metrics here, but what's going on there?
Yeah, we'll jump into the metrics after. The latest on that is there's been an integration into Gate.io for Hideera native USDC. So it's awesome to see these continued integrations on and off ramps. The big unlocks, I think, were USDC native on Binance and Crypto.com. My fingers are crossed for Coinbase Hideera native USDC integration.
Yeah.
So hopefully that comes through, but we'll see.
Have you heard anything behind the scenes? Do we have any idea when that might be coming, or is it's just going to happen and then we'll know?
I feel like, it's that's been the case so far, is it just kind of happens and we'll figure it out with everybody else.
All right, Brady. Well, there are some really good yield opportunities going on in the Hideera space, so I'm going to jump into those real quick. Starting off on SaucerSwap, and this is version 1. So it covers the liquidity pair across all of the possible prices between the two assets. And HBAR X is pretty low, but it's because it's very stable, and that's at 2.18%. Sauce HBAR is at 14%. USDC HBAR is at almost 29%, and that's pretty impressive. It maintains those high values. It's also a good way to exit and enter into positions in some ways, but we'll talk a little bit more about that once we get into V2. HBAR Karate has been holding up pretty strong at 30%. USDC Bonzo is at 33%. HBAR Pack 22%. And then we have a couple meme coins here that I've noticed have held a pretty high APR as well. HBAR Dosa is at 31%, and HBAR Dino is at 43%. And Brady, how I pick the ones that we go over each week is I start out with the ones that have the most liquidity. If some of those don't seem too exciting because they have low APRs, I also bring up all the ones that have higher APRs, and I'll replace some of those ones that we'll say are a little bit more boring with some of the ones that have a little bit higher APRs, taking into consideration the amount of liquidity as well. So I want, over at least $100,000 worth of liquidity. If it only has $5,000 of liquidity, even though it might have a really high APR, I'm not going to mess with those. But just to talk about my methodology as far as which ones I'm picking. All right, now we're going to move over to V2, which is concentrated liquidity. USDC HBAR is at 137%. You might be looking at that and saying, man, that is so much higher than with V1. But what we don't know is how compressed that concentrated liquidity is. And that's going to determine what these APRs are. So it's harder to compare these from week to week. But as we've discussed in the past, it's still good to go over. So HBAR Pack is at 200%. USDC Carat, now that is backed by actual diamond. So I think that because you can transfer these on the Diamond Standard website, I think that there's somebody doing some arbitrage here. So it's keeping the volume up. So that's why the APR is staying up. So that's really interesting. I think there's probably an opportunity here. So pay attention to this. If you're interested in doing those kind of arbitrage opportunities, I think Carrot's a good one to look at. HBAR Bonzo is at 24%. Sauce HBAR is at 57%. USDC Sauce 126%. And then we have a couple wrap tokens. So we know that there's been a lot of movement in BNB. That's the native token for the Binance centralized exchange. That's at 110%, the wrapped version on Hideera. And then wrapped ETH HBAR is at 30%. And what I was talking about before is you can use these liquidity pools to kind of exit a position if it moves through a price range. We'll say you have HBAR USDC and you expect the price to move through 25 cents to 30 cents. You can set up concentrated liquidity in that range. And as it passes through that range, you're getting rewards, but you're also kind of selling into USDC as it goes through that range. And if it exits on the top of that range, then you pretty much have all USDC and you've exited your position. So you can do some pretty cool things like that, but have to know how to work it. But Brady, you wanted to mention something around vaults on, is it Ichi?
Yeah, Ichi auto pools is another way of contributing liquidity within SaucerSwap. These are operated by Ichi. They're in SaucerSwap. So when you're going into a V2 position, as long as it has the auto tag for the specific pair of assets, when you go to deposit, instead of the manual deposit option, being able to go to the auto deposit option, and it's a single-sided deposit. So, let's give the example of USDC and HBAR. If you choose the auto position, you can supply only USDC or only HBAR, and the APRs for that, for example, for USDC is around 53%, and then for HBAR it's 64.76%. The way that Ichi auto pools work is when you make your deposit in one or the other, it does sort of create a ratio for you, effectively swapping some of what you've supplied for the other asset. And then in a withdraw, you would be withdrawing 2 assets as part of that. So a range of both. There's less visibility in terms of sort of what you're going to end up with at the end. Of course, you can always sort of get the 2 and then swap into whichever one it is that you're desired to be in. But it automatically manages that concentrated liquidity for you, which is pretty great. So just another option in terms of being able to supply liquidity into SaucerSwap.
Yeah, there's all kinds of cool things that are popping up, and I'm looking forward to Bonzo Vaults when they come out. That's going to allow you to do all kinds of different things that developers come up with to be able to use different strategies as well. And moving over to Bonzo, to supply liquidity, you'll get an APY of 0.3% for HBAR, over 5% for USDC. With the extra kicker, you'll get over 6% for supplying the Bonzo token, 1.5% for supplying Sauce, 1.5% for supplying Steam, almost 5% for supplying Grelf, and 5.5% for supplying the native token for the Kabeel platform, KBL. But Brady, I think it's time to get into some of your metrics.
Yeah, let's do it. Hideera DeFi TBL, which is inclusive of liquid staking, is sitting at about $255.5 million. It's been pretty steady since the last time that we've chatted. We've seen some ups and downs. Obviously, price has an impact on the dollar-denominated value that's here. But in HBAR-denominated value, it's a little bit of an uptick, but again, sort of sideways as well. What has changed pretty dramatically is monthly DEX volume. So this month, we closed out July with 393.44 million in trading volume. Compared to the previous month, we saw a little bit of a drop previously, and then now it seems we're on the way back up. So very cool to see that start to pick back up again. It does kind of follow the price charts when you look at that as well, just in terms of the same pattern. And then in HBAR denominated value, that's about 1.673 billion in HBAR. And so even in HBAR denominated value, still higher than what we've seen the prior few months.
Nothing drives volume like a little excitement around the price, right?
No doubt. Next up is stablecoins. So the major stablecoin on Hideera is Hideera native USDC. And then this metric is broken out into 2 categories. So there's stablecoin TVL, which again is in Hideera native USDC. And that's the amount of stablecoins that are locked into DeFi protocols on the network. Stablecoin liquidity is the amount of circulating supply of stablecoins across the network. And when we look at stablecoin TVL, we did see a large influx in SaucerSwap and then a large influx as well in Bonzo. I think last time we chatted, this was sitting at around 9 or 10 million
Wow.
and now up to 17 million. So that's really great to see that utilization and both large protocols on the network having an influx there.
And when it comes to stablecoins, we kind of decided that this is probably the best metric to pay attention to. So seeing this going up and to the right is certainly a good thing to see.
Yeah, I think TVL of stablecoin liquidity is going to be the most solid metric. Circulating supply, as we'll get into, is very volatile and has been and then seems to continue to be. So on that note, stablecoin liquidity on Hideera sitting at 74.81 million. And when we look at the chart in DeFi Llama, with regards to the movements of stablecoin liquidity, pretty volatile. Since since about March of this year, we've seen large rises and falls, and then just recently a bit of a dip, quite a dip actually, from where we were before. I think we've speculated on sort of what may be happening behind the scenes. I still don't really have any idea. It's obviously institutional in some way, but really don't know exactly what causes the rises and falls here.
It's too hard to guess. I think the best thing is we put it up there because it's a fun number to track, but at the same time, we know that people that are actually adding liquidity on Bonzo and SaucerSwap, that they're taking that USDC and they're actually doing something with it. So again, that's a much better metric, but we saw this big dip. We have no clue why. So it's a fun number to track, but I'm not going to put too much weight in it until we get some more information as to exactly what's going on with it.
Yeah, no doubt. And then actually to that point, when we think about utilization of USDC being the most important metric or metrics, TVL is one of them, but I'm also thinking about the transfers, like the volume of stable coins on the network. So maybe on the next DeFi corner, we can try to figure out how to pull that data and display that, like even if it's just transactions of USDC and then obviously swaps as well.
Sure. And the other thing that we were talking about before we jumped on here is I kept looking at USDC.cool and it was saying that the Hideera liquidity is at 61.5 million. And you were saying that you're pulling this from DeFi Llama, which I'm not sure if that includes other things, other stable coins. But I know we have AUDD, we have the Swiss franc stablecoin. I'm sure there's some other ones as well. I'm not sure everything that's included, but I think it is a good way to go using DeFi Llama because it seems like it adds some other things in there.
Yeah, I think this might be inclusive of these other stablecoin assets on the network. And then there's also DeFi Llama in terms of the updates to the chart sometimes are slightly delayed too. So it could be that USDC.cool actually has the latest because I do feel like that's more real time. But I am curious, like I'm going to check tomorrow actually to see, just because I'm curious. And then next up, we have staking rewards. So there's liquid staking with HBAR X from Steer Labs and native staking on the network through Hideera nodes. Liquid staking with HBAR X is sitting at about 4.33%. That has dropped since the last time that we've had a DeFi corner. So, it looks like with some of the market volatility and other things, folks are trying to find opportunities for yield with HBAR. When more folks supply HBAR into the liquid staking platform to receive HBAR X, the more people that supply, the lower the rate goes as part of that mechanism. So it's indicative of people seeking yield for HBAR. And then for native staking APY, no changes there. It's kind of been the same, quite low percentage yield.
All right, good stuff. Well, in my general weekly update, I talked about the HBAR market. Most of the gains since the last time we talked have held. We're still, I think, in the mid 20s, at least the last time I looked as far as the HBAR price. A lot of the other HTS tokens out there are doing fairly well. Another thing I want to touch on is we're seeing some of the up layer 2 teams starting to do their INOs, and that's, of course, how they're going to get their tokens out there. I know 2 that are live on Kabila and Centex right now. We have the World Calisthenics Organization, which I think is really cool. And then another team that is essentially gamifying the Premier League, so an established league over in the UK, and that's Top Flight Football. So those are both going on right now. As far as the broader crypto market, I'm pretty excited because back in 2021, of course, that was the last time we had a proper bull market in this space. We've been experiencing one for the past several months, but normally during the summer, we go through these summer doldrums where there's a lot of choppy action. Usually there's some downward motion, especially in the beginning of the summer. And looking back in 2021, especially looking at the altcoins, that's what we saw. We saw choppy action. We saw downwards action, especially going into mid-July. And this year, we didn't see nearly as much of that. Even though we had some volatility here over the past few days, we're still up significantly in the first 2 months of the summer. And then if you look in that 2021 season, going into, we'll say, November or the end of the year, where we saw a really good run-up, you see that jump during that time. And I'm really excited with all these catalysts we have going on in the space, whether it's the governmental stuff. We had that presidential paper come out from the working group that mentioned Hideera or used some information from Hideera, so they know, or we know, that they're really paying attention to what we're doing in the space. And then we have the ETFs, which I think are going to be a really big driver. And now that we have all that infrastructure in place, like the Robinhood listing, and now we have a lot more things going on with USDC available on and off ramps with Binance, I think we're just in really good shape. So, Brady, we really appreciate you coming on here every week and getting into the weeds of things that are going on in the DeFi space. There's so many opportunities out there. If you don't like what you just heard as far as the staking rewards, there are other opportunities in the Hideera space, so we suggest you check them out. But, Brady, that's all we have for this week. Next week, I'm going to be going to Rare Evo, so it's going to be a couple weeks out, so we'll see you then.
Sounds great. Thanks so much for having me on. Have fun at Rare Evo.